Also different economic size. Indonesia GDP accounted for a third of ASEAN GDP. One country, but 1/3 of the ASEAN economy is huge, almost twice the size of Thailand. And then we have three middle-income economies like Malaysia, the Philippines, and Thailand. And when we have small economies like CMV countries, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Vietnam, which have much smaller economies. So we have huge economy, medium-sized economy, and small economy together. In terms of demography, Indonesia has almost 40% of ASEAN population, and we have 4 mid-sized countries. Then we have smaller states like in Brunei, and we have city-state like in Singapore. Singapore is the only city-state in Asia. When we talk about city-states, like just one city, but it is also a state. So it's a very unique situation. Normally when you have a country, you have city and you have the countryside. But Singapore doesn't have the countryside. It's all city as a state. In terms of economic structure, we have different levels of development and resource endowment. Singapore is a service economy. Malaysia is also a service economy. The Philippines is a service economy. I mean, the service sector is larger than the rest of the economy. Whereas Thailand is an industrialized economy, but we have majority of people in the agricultural sector, which account for only 10% of the economy. So it's not balanced. Most people work in the sector which has a small share of the economy. See? But the service economy in Thailand is growing very fast compared to the industrialized economy because of the shrinking exports of the industrial sector. But service economy is growing because of the expansion in the tourism sector. So very different. In Cambodia, they have big agricultural economy. In Laos too. In Vietnam, they have growing industrial sector, very fast growth of the industry in Vietnam. And in Myanmar, it's growing economy in all sectors because they just open the economy. In terms of resource endowments, Singapore has no natural resources, but it has one of the best brain power in the world. Human resource endowment. In Malaysia as well, they have a lot of professionals. Indonesia has the biggest resource endowment in Southeast Asia, or one of the best in the world. It has everything you think of: oil, gas, gold, tin, iron ore, coal, everything. They have that in Indonesia. Also fish in the water. The majority of fish that we consume in Thailand came from Indonesian and Myanmar water, not Thai water. Thai water has very few fishes now. So we have to appreciate that. So we rely on our neighboring countries' resources. Myanmar also has a lot of resources. They have jade, yok, mountains of jade in northern Myanmar. Underneath the mountain, they have huge, jade deposits. Also, gemstones. So Myanmar has a lot of resources. In terms of ethnicity and languages, we have different groups of people living across the region: Malay people, Chinese people, Thai-speaking people, Filipinos people, Indian people. So this proved to be quite a good assets for ASEAN because the diasporas of these people, they have good global networks. The boom in Vietnamese export came partly because of the Vietnamese networks around the world. During the Indochina War, millions of Vietnamese people became refugees, and they were resettled in third world, in the third countries like in Australia, New Zealand, France, Europe, America. And these people, they open shops, they became business people, and they bring in goods from Vietnam to those economies, to those countries. But despite the fact that we have big country and big economy like Indonesia, the largest country in ASEAN is too domestic oriented. It doesn't assume the role as the ASEAN leader. It's more focused on the domestic politics, domestic economy, doesn't lead the region. But on the other hand, we have Singapore, which is the richest country, but it's too small. Economy is too small compared to Indonesia or Thailand. But Singapore trying to lead the region. Singapore trying to make a lot of new initiatives. So if we combine that together, for example, if Indonesia assumes the role as the ASEAN leader, if Indonesia is driving ASEAN forward, it will be more effective. ASEAN could have more concrete measures, could become more deepened, integrated region. But if Indonesia has less interest in ASEAN, then ASEAN cannot move very far. Different institutional and commercial policy environments. Singapore, Malaysia, and Thailand are more liberal, whereas Indonesia and the Philippines are traditionally protectionist countries because they have big conglomerates, and these big companies, they have a lot of political influence in the countries. If you look at the ASEAN trade issues, the total trade of ASEAN increased a lot in just less than 1 decade, from $1.6 trillion to $2.5 trillion. So in just less than 1 decade, is increasing greatly. But when you look at the major trading partners of ASEAN, despite the fact that one quarter of ASEAN trade is with ASEAN neighbors, but the rest came from other countries. Number 2 is China, the second largest trading partner of ASEAN, then European Union, Japan, and USA. So 3/4 of ASEAN are external partners. It means ASEAN economy trade predominantly with the rest of the world. Intra-regional trade accounted for only a fourth of total trade, but still increasing. In the year 2013, intra-ASEAN trade reached $300 billion, a 2% increase year on year. Intra-ASEAN trade accounted for the highest share of both ASEAN exports and imports. It means ASEAN is the top export destination for ASEAN country, and also the main source of the import of ASEAN as well. Intra-trade is becoming more broad-based, with manufacturing sector play a larger role compared to commodities trade previously. In the past, ASEAN export like commodities to each other, but now they mainly trade on we call intermediate goods, which consists of parts industrial parts and components like electronic parts or automobile parts. After trade concessions are multilateralized and market-driven, the growth of ASEAN trade is not driven by the policy alone, but is driven by the market integration or the supply chain networks across East Asia. For example, Japanese multinationals, they invest in China, they invest in many ASEAN countries, but the investments focus on different industrial components. They produce diesel engine in Thailand, they may produce transmission equipment in the Philippines, they produce some computer parts in Malaysia and Singapore. So these global companies, they trading parts, industrial parts among Asian countries, and they also send industrial parts to China to be assembled and then export as finished product to Europe, America, and Japan. That's why we have seen this rising trade figure, because of the industrial supply networks across the countries of multinational companies. It's not that, Thai companies are so smart that they could export a lot. Mainly, if you look into the figures, most exports come from multinational companies. It's the same with Indonesia or Malaysia or Singapore. We are mainly investment destination for global companies. Singapore dominates intra-ASEAN trade flows. Largest non-Singaporean trade flow dominated by Malaysia trade with Indonesia and Thailand. So when you look at the individual countries' trade figures, Singapore has the largest trading volume in ASEAN for the trading among ASEAN countries, the figures, imports and exports. And the second flow is between Malaysia and Indonesia, and Malaysia and Thailand. Some people ask, should ASEAN move towards the establishment of the customs union? Customs union is different from ASEAN community. It's a step forward. What does it mean? When you have the ASEAN community, you allow the free flow of capital, the flow of goods with no tariff, the flows of investment, and you allow ASEAN nationals to own a high percentage share of ownership in your companies, like from 49% to 70% for many service economies. But with the customs union, it means that you have to have the same tariff policy towards the external countries, the third countries, which is quite difficult. Why is it difficult? Because Singapore has 0% tariff now to the rest of the world. Singapore has 0% tariff already. So if we gonna have customs union, it means we have to have the same tariff to America, same tariff to Japan. It means that we have to lower Thai tariff to 0%. Or Indonesia or the Philippines have to do the same thing, which is impossible. Because a lot of industries in our countries could not survive. We can have that among ASEAN countries, only 10 countries that more manageable. But with the rest of the world, it's impossible. That's why we could not have customs union. For external trade, China remains the top external destination of ASEAN exports. And also Japan, the EU 28 countries, and Japan ranked number 2 and number 3, US number 4. On imports, China was the top external import origin of ASEAN countries, followed by Japan and US. If we look at the ASEAN foreign direct investment, you can see that the EU was the main investor in ASEAN, the top investor in ASEAN from the European Union. ASEAN countries themselves ranked number 2 at 18%, followed by Japan, USA, and China number 5. Total FDI flow into ASEAN increased heavily from $85 billion in the year 2007 to $136 billion in the year 2014. And ASEAN now rank the investment in ASEAN, the proportion of investment in ASEAN is now 11% of the global investment flows. If ASEAN is like one country, now it will be ranked really highly on many things. It will be number 1 for crude palm oil production. I think the main countries that produce palm oil are Malaysia and Indonesia together. It will be number 1 natural rubber production. Thailand is now the largest exporter of rubber products. Number 1 of cities in top 100 business process outsourcing locations worldwide. What is the BCO? It's like call center. In Manila is now one of the leading center of call center in the world. India also, but in ASEAN countries there are many cities which serve as the top in the top 100 sources locations. Malaysia also Thailand as well. Size of Muslim population number 1. Also number 1 of issuance of sukuk, Islamic bonds. Number 2 for FDI inflows. Length of coastline is number 2 because of many islands in Indonesia and the Philippines. That's why ASEAN has a lot of fishery resources. Rice production, number 2